Howdo. We've hand cut our body out. Suppose we best do the same thing for a neck. And this is what we've got. Absolutely gorgeous. We've got 2 strips of maple and this beautiful piece of oak running down the middle. Ooh, you've got to love some medullary rays. So first off, we can just cut all of these down to an 80 centimeter long strip. Now these obviously want gluing together, and I'm pretty happy with the way that the maple, as it's been ordered, it is planed, squared edged and pretty nicely done, may I say. The oak, however, is square, it's flat, it's straight, but I think it was probably planed when it wasn't quite dry. There's some grain raising on there that really shouldn't be there. That's more better, huh? And then it's just a simple matter of get your clamps ready and glue it up. Always rub a little bit, get some capillary action going on. Right, now to hold things in place, I like to put some clamps on that way. Stops the planks from moving around that way. And then notice I've put it on this big beam here, which I know is a flat surface. So when I clamp it down, rather than just clamping the 3 boards together, I'm actually clamping everything down to this board because I know that's perfectly flat. There's no possible way I can clamp some kind of a bend or a twist into this. I can set it up and walk away happy that it's all going to be spot on when I get back. The wood shavings from the planing are some of the best stuff you can get for clearing up glue splurge. And because all of that is clamped to this big board, it does mean I can then take that big board out of my vise, plonk that somewhere else, knowing everything's staying perfectly straight and lovely. And then I can just prep 2 chunks of this oak to fit on the sides of the headstock, making sure that that's a wide enough chunk then. So, after a quick skim through with the plane, we now have a nice clean flat surface. Now, not only is it flat in that direction, it's nice and level, you also want to be checking for any kind of twist that might be in there. So get some winding sticks, basically 2 flat level sticks, put a black line on one. As you lower down, they should match level for level. If this back stick looks like that, or like that, you've got a twist in it. If they're perfectly level, well then you're good to go. So I'm going to mark off here where the nut is going to go. These extra widths that I put on for the headstock would have been a terrible idea had I wanted to cut out the truss rod channel with a router, because that would get in the way of the fence and running it up and down. However, I'm not going to use a router because I'm feeling in a hand tooly mood. So we grasp the 6mm chisel. Okay, so I have my center line I have my truss rod, and I also have the nut. I always much prefer to mark things off and cut things while I have the pieces in my hand. I don't want to work off someone else's measurements. I always want the piece in my fingers. But speaking of measurements, with this being a 30-inch scale base 6-esque, I've gone for a 550mm truss rod, which needed a little bit of searching because they're not a very common size. So this is something I wanted to ask you about. I have my little nut mark, which is going to sit like that. I generally like a little bit of a gap because I like a solid piece of wood for that nut to sit on. Some people put their truss rods right up to that nut mark. Some people might even take it past that nut mark. If you've done this before, what is your preferred placement for the end of the truss rod, where you get your Allen key in? Do you put it on, before or after? Is it poking more towards the headstock, or is it poking a bit further down the neck? Put a comment in now and let me know, because I'm really interested to see what you all think about that. So with that little bit set back from the nut, I'm going to mark that off there. That's where the end of that section wants to be, and at this end I can mark that off there. Top tips for chiseling truss rod channels. Tip number 1, if you've not done this before, get a plank of wood and run it along the channel that you want to cut. So you could clamp the wood down, so as your chisel sits central on your center line, it's very easy to then pin the chisel up against this straight edge. So you know your chisel is going to be vertical with every strike because you're holding it up against that wall. Now that's very good, it keeps you very precise. If you've not done it before, it's a really nice guide just to help you to know that you're going to stay in a straight line and you're going to keep that chisel vertical. I, however, find it kind of slows me down a little bit, so once you're happy that you can just hold that chisel upright and it's not going to wander, then you can use tip number 2. And that is to make a mark at each end that you know is the correct width and central, and then connect those edges up just lightly with a knife so you can see it. So you have a marked off section like that. And then whichever of those two techniques you use, mark off your depth stop. And with that, we're ready to go. So make sure the section that you're hitting is the section that's clamped up, or even sat on top of your worktop if it's a nice sturdy worktop. And then we're just going to start really gentle. So I'm putting that into the mark that I initially made. Just a couple of taps to start us all with. Move us back a millimetre or so at a time. And literally one tap gets you in. Now we're not going fully down to depth at this point, but every time you step back, that's going to get deeper until you stop wanting to go deeper. It works, I promise. And after a little while, you can then lever some of that rubbish out, and we'll clean up this end later. Now while he's tapping away at that truss rod channel, now's a pretty good time to talk about safety. Obviously using super sharp chisels, plane blades, and especially then if you're going to use power routers and bandsaws and all this kind of thing, safety is quite an important thing, isn't it? Keep your fingers out the way. But if you're in your workshop, you should really have some kind of first aid kit in there, and pretty much everybody knows that you're in your workshop. Little bit different if the muck hits the fan while you're out on your bike. This build series is sponsored by the Real Rider app. This is a crash detection system that slots in your pocket and knows when you've had a whoopsie. You're on the other side of the hedge, you can't be found and you're not getting up. The app phones the paramedics, contacts them, tells them exactly where you are. It's always good to know you've got someone watching over your shoulder. Now you should be able to see there that when we get to the end, because of the bevel of the chisel, there's a slope on this end here. Look, you can see that as it's gone down, and it follows that bevel edge gradient as it goes through. Simple matter of just turning the chisel round and incrementally going down, getting closer to that edge until you finish, and then just basically do exactly the same at this end just to tidy it up and make sure that we have those clean edges. Now once it's chiseled out, you can just go back in and just scrape back the bottom to flatten it off and get rid of all those loose sections. Or I like to get my little homemade hand router out and just run it backwards and forwards just to clean up some of those sections in the middle. And with the obligatory tiny bit of widening and deepening for the nut section, that is a truss rod channel done. Yes, it's a little bit more work, but for me, far more enjoyable. And isn't that what we're in here for? So we've just proved that we can do a truss rod channel with a chisel. So obviously now we're going to get the big templates out and the massive power routers and everything else to shape this neck in the right place, aren't we? No. Nope, what we are going to do is cut out that section of the drawing. Un, deux, trois. Now, yes, alright, I'm having a bit of fun, but this is no different from how we cut out the body. If you didn't see that getting cut out, there'll be links in the description for the rest of this playlist. But that's all we're going to do to cut out the neck. Yeah, I'm just going to come in and saw sections down and then chisel it off. It's really not as scary as it might first appear. So I flipped the neck over, I'm now working on the opposite side, and all the wood grain along here is wanting to dig into the wood look. So the saw cuts are doing their job because they're not letting it just go any further down, but it does mean that it's going to get a bit dodgy as you go further and further along. So what I'm going to do is start at that end and work this way along. Once we've had our fun with the chisel, we've got the bulk of that waste off. I'm going to take the rest of it off with a scrub plane, which is basically any old plane that's got a slightly rounded blade on the end of it that you can use across the grain like that, and works beautifully. And then I could go in with a normal hand plane, smoothing plane. But that does get a bit awkward up around this area. So maybe we could use a rasp. All it comes down to is using a tool that works, that does the job, and actually that you enjoy doing. One shaped neck using just hand tools. It is possible, folks. Right, so I'm now going to turn my attention to this headstock area. So we need an angle cutting into that. I'm whittering on because I need to take a breath. Hand tools are fun, but they do get a bit tiring. Well, I suppose it saves you going to the gym, doesn't it? Rib cuts, not as much fun by hand. Having said that, I wouldn't have got the thing underneath my little hobby bandsaw thing anyway, so regardless of what happens, that needed to be cut by hand. But there we go. it'll do for now. So now it comes time to cut out this headstock shape. Now I could do the stop, cut and chisel technique again, or I could get a little coping saw out, or because it's the end of the day and my arms are tired, I'm just going to cheat and use the bandsaw. Is it cheating? Is it? Not bad for a day's work, I'm sure you'll agree. And yes, you can cut things out by hand. Now, if you want even more hints and tips on making guitar necks with wood and tools, definitely check out this video here. Until next week, take care, sharpen your tools, stay safe. God bless.